What we have read is a story about a succession of kings leading up to the return of Christ. If we are anywhere close to the return of Christ, then one of those kings is alive and ruling today. However, as you will see from this example by Ed Milhausen, he does not accept the fact that there is plainly an unbroken succession of kings leading up to the return of Christ. Ed does do a good job of explaining his information here on his website. Ed's good job of being articulate really helps us to see the obvious differences. With that being said, we've read the first 10 verses of Daniel chapter 11. There was no major gaps from verses 2 through 10. There are a succession of these four kings. The fourth king is rich and powerful and mighty, and when he shall stand up, he shall be broken, and his kingdom will not go to his posterity. His kingdom will be divided into at least a kingdom of the north and a kingdom of the south. When the king of the north dies, his son takes over. Years later, when that son vanishes, then a riser of taxes person becomes the king for a few days, and then at that time he is killed by a vile person who later on is then killed when Christ returns. Yet Ed thinks that the first king in verse 2 is a king back around 530 BC. Daniel says these kings are from Persia, which today is Iran. Yet Ed thinks this mighty king is Alexander the Great, who's from Greece, which wasn't a king until over 100 years later after the fourth king had died. Do you see over 100-year gap between verse 2 and verse 3, or verse 2 and verse 4? I don't. Ed then writes about this kingdom of the north and in the kingdom of the south as being two of the four generals who took over when Alexander the Great died. However, Ed writes that the two kings at the end of years are not those two kings. They are sons of those two kings who actually do make an agreement. But Daniel makes it clear to me that the agreement is not successful. Daniel wrote, "And in the end of years they shall join themselves together, for the king's daughter of the south shall come to the kingdom of the north to make an agreement. But she shall not retain the power of the arm, neither shall he stand nor his arm, but she shall be given up, and they that brought her, and he that begat her, and he that strengthened her in these times." Even if we wanted to believe what Ed said is true, then there would have only been an unbroken succession of 3 more kings before Christ would have returned in power and glory. Christ would have returned in power and glory before he was even born. Ed and the Bible scholars and pastors and other church leaders who have taught this type of interpretation, where the first 3 kings began back around 530 BC, they're obviously and clearly wrong. Now it's time to focus our attention on what the right interpretation is.